further ado, thank you, panellists. And my first question is, what sorts of information do policymakers want from social science and humanities research projects? And also, how do they like the information to be presented? And for this one, I'm just going to go along the table and ask any of you who would like to, in turn, to make an intervention. Okay.
Good. Hello. I'm still a bit in a difficulty because I am now an official minister or state secretary, and I'm still have a loose tongue from my years of. So all the officials in Brussels they are a bit worried about me attending any panel in Brussels. Apologize for or not being too outspoken enough or for being too outspoken. I think it's a good thing that we bring social science into the game. One of the last things I did for the Greens in the European Parliament beneath negotiating all these wonderful recent directives and regulations was doing a 2050 scenario. And any scenario which brings us to 1.5 or well below 2 degrees is impossible without lifestyle changes. So we squeezed out with Felix Matz from Eco Institute. So we have a very, very radical renewable layout. We have a radical efficiency everywhere. And together with the most radical efficiency and renewables you can think about, you don't get to 2 degrees. So you need circular economy into the picture, so you need to completely revolutionize processing, and you need lifestyle changes. So, and that is why I think it's more urgent than ever that we need social science. And in social science, I think one is, it's all about majority building, and building majorities is, so I think we too often think that it's about a political majority in parliament or in the government or in the council. But at the end of the day, my experience as a policymaker is it's about societal majorities bring about political majorities. Look to tobacco, look to, I don't know, to the Me Too movement. So as long as you don't have a broad societal consensus on certain things, like less meat, more vegan, less car ownership, more car sharing. So you will not get political majority. So, and in that sense, what I think I need as a policymaker from social science is, how do I trigger majorities in society, but then also majorities, for example, how in a company. So it's also this kind of dynamics. And then it's about communication on lifestyle changes. And I can tell you that we as Greens have done tremendous errors on communication. Remember German Greens communicating on costs of flying around. Remember German Greens communicating on the perhaps once a week there would be fruits and vegetables, and not only Schweinshaxen. And then the way this had a repercussion on also voting. So I think we need lifestyle changes is very difficult. So lifestyle change is not a top-down world. Eco-design is top-down, governance regulation is top-down, renewables regulation or the directives is top-down, but lifestyle change is bottom-up. And therefore you need, I think it's much more about communication, and therefore we need more of kind of this wisdom and good. And then how as a policymaker, I think one first thing would be to analyze something which went wrong. Let's take the example, ban of light bulbs. One of the most important measures we took, because without that there would be no LED market, but it was a communication disaster. Why was it a communication disaster? Has anybody looked into this? Because policymakers, I think the first thing which they want to learn from is understanding defeats or when they lost, because that is interesting to understand. So that's what every Mourinho or every other soccer trainer is doing, is when he loses with his team, he tries to understand why did we lose. And in order to know how do we have to change players or our strategy or tactics to win.
Okay, so one of the points that I wanted to make it has been already mentioned, but I think it's no bad to repeat it. First of all, I think in energy efficiency policy, I think so far we have been already sort of big users of the results, of the research outcomes, of the impacts of research, especially in social sciences, I would say. Not so much in humanities. I think this is still a challenge. But I think we have already some experience in dealing with something that is not just techno-engineering results, but also involves psychology or behavioral sciences. I think an area where we definitely could benefit a lot from experts and academics and SSH is the area of helping communicating better what needs to be done to make policies in energy efficiency effective, because this goes beyond the good policy design, or maybe needs to be incorporated in the policy design. And I think engagement of people and communication, as it was mentioned, is really key to the effectiveness of these policies. And one other point is that in terms of what sorts of information we would like to have, I think in general what is expected from research, from academics is, okay, tell us what we don't know. And so maybe it's also, I don't know what SSH can offer, and I have some ideas, but maybe there's a lot that I just don't know. I have no idea. So it would be good to have also some proposals of things that I don't expect to be relevant for our work, but maybe you as a researcher in this area know, and they have to find some channels to bring the attention on some topics that are completely perhaps out of our radar but could be important.
Well, obviously I'm not a policymaker, but when we meet, well, not policymakers, I think policy analysts, national government civil servants, they tell us what they want is high quality evidence. So if it's social science evidence, it needs to be meeting professional standards, it needs to be peer reviewed, ideally it needs to have big sample sizes, it needs to meet various criteria. But what surprised me slightly is after we'd had these discussions with the civil servants, they then said, well, of course, we're not the policy makers, we're not the decision makers, we just kind of look at the policy. The people who make the decisions are the politicians, and there it's got to be on two sides of A4 or they're not interested. So that was the message we got. Make it really high quality and then make it really short.
Thank you. Well, I'm similarly, maybe more so hamstrung because I'm more from a technical STEM background, but I have been involved in policy analysis as well. So for me, I guess most of it is, ultimately I always want to boil everything down to some sort of quantified numbers, but of course we can't really do that in the end. So I guess from a policy making perspective, really, I guess it's something that's very simple to understand, perhaps overlapping what Tina was saying. The politicians may have a different idea to what the policymakers might have. And for me, it would be, I've always looked at it more as SSH, economists aside, that it's really about communication and implementation, but I think, going towards, what can we do in terms of changing lifestyle and other bits, just what can it really do in terms of reducing emissions and making a difference?
Well, a lot of the things have already been said, but I think one of the issues that is wrong with the question also is that very often the wrong question is asked. And to be honest, and I'm challenging a little bit now, again, when you say, tell me what I need to say or how to communicate, what happens is that you are actually thinking that people on the ground don't change their behavior because they don't know they should. But we all know, right? We still drive cars, we eat meat, we fly, etc., etc. So there's something else going on, and that is That's what we don't know, and that's where the social sciences and humanities need to come in to figure out, okay, in spite of knowing better, we still don't do it. Why? And that's the answer is the system. So the answer you will get as policy analysis experts or policymakers is potentially not the answer you want, but it is what is needed to change.
Thanks. So first of all, I'd like to challenge this perspective that if you're at the working level, you're not a policymaker. I think you are a policymaker because you shape what the people up there then eventually decide. So I don't think you can get out of that. And as somebody who works at the European Commission, social scientist by training, but surrounded by more technical people, that will color what I'm going to say a little bit. It sound a little bit bleak. I want to offer three things to you. One way in which policymakers approach social science is that they don't understand it. They don't understand what the heck it's good for. And so the challenge becomes to actually convince them that there's a certain utility in social science and humanities. So that's one kind of policymaker. Another policymaker will expect all the answers from you. They will, say they will want an energy model from you that you preferably feed with quantifiable data, and then out comes the policy proposal that makes everybody happy, right? So that they don't have to make decisions, they don't have to evaluate things, they don't have to make choices anymore. That's an expectation that you get too. Number three is the kind of policymaker who wants to get people on board. And this could be the variant that Claude mentioned, learning from defeats. It could be also a sinister variant where people are really interested in manipulating people, and the usage of survey methodologies that come from more the commercial sphere has become quite sophisticated in politics. So you could come across policymakers like that. But there are also a lot of genuinely interested policymakers who have certain goals. Yes, like we at the Commission, we have the goal of the energy transition, the clean energy transition, and how do you get people around to actually get on board of that? So there are entry points there to say, well, okay, move beyond a technical focus, move beyond a purely instrumental focus, and that's where social science perspectives come in, and humanities perspectives as well.
Okay, thank you, panel. Over to you now if you've got any comments you'd like to add. What I've heard there is tell us what we don't know, make it high quality but keep it simple. Don't tell us just what we want to hear, but do help us understand what you're talking about. And the question it raised for me is, when should social scientists be telling policymakers this? Because there was a little bit of us tell us how to communicate what we've already decided to do, which I can almost see the steam coming out of Ruth's ears at that point. So, yeah, anything that you would like to add? Great, we've solved it. We'll go home.
No, but if I can come back to your statement where you say it's so are you serious about saying the broad majority of citizens are conscious, and then it's the system as such who basically makes what they want to do such in a certain sense a difficult choice that they don't move? That was basically your statement.
No.
No?
My statement?
No, not your statement. Well, what's your first name? I didn't get your... Ruth, yeah, so Ruth.
No, but there needs to be more... Yes, there is a very large group of people that is conscious, but is to some extent paralyzed because they do want to help out. They want to bring their kids by bike to school, but then it rains. They want to...
what do we do about that?
But that's the question. Instead of thinking, oh, we need to tell them that they should bring their kids to school by bike, think about why they don't do it. For example, just a very practical example. I live in the Netherlands, so biking is our culture, right? The school at one point asked parents not to bring their kids to school by bike because the schoolyard was flooded by bikes, and the kids could not play anymore. So parents stopped bringing their kids by bike to school. So there is a system in place.
And did you fire the director of the school afterwards?
Okay, can we just go over to the audience for a few minutes?
Yes, Rod Jansen from Energy and Demand. Before the Clean Energy Package came out, I was working with 2 other colleagues from Britain, and we called ourselves the Energy Advice Exchange. And what we were trying to do was to empower the consumer. A lot of the focus of the Clean Energy Package was on buildings. It's the biggest decision a family will ever make is to actually renovate their home, especially if we want it to be an 80% improvement or factor 4 or whatever. And it was thanks to the European Climate Foundation that we got some funding to do some of the initial work on that. The problem was, as soon as we came out with a paper, it goes to either council members or to Parliament. The first thing is how much it's going to cost. It's going to be too expensive. Without us actually being able to follow through, when we're looking at 2050, we have to be looking at the consumer and the whole role of what we're doing to really try and empower the consumer. And maybe the fault was, maybe we shouldn't have been doing it 6 months before the Clean Energy Package. Maybe it should have been done 2 years before the Clean Energy Package came out. So this is ongoing work. Just one other small little thing. I was at the Behavior Conference in Zurich in September. I was the facilitator for a panel from the National Energy Agencies, the ENR network. The work that's being done by researchers all over Europe is really very good, except it's so tiny. It doesn't help us get to 2050 or to 2030. Even one school, there was a project for a game. It looked like a very good game, but then no one was going to take it and commercialize it and actually roll it out within the country or whatever and take the next step. So we're thinking too small, and so the social sciences, some of these researchers, we have to be moving one step further. How we go take it to that next step. We've got a big problem for 2030, 2040, and 2050, and so we've got to change our attitude. And when we come to communication, my whole thing about communication is don't blame that person out there, blame the people in this room. Somehow we're not communicating right, and sometimes we're only communicating to each other. And so we've got to move. We've got to change this. This has got to change. And so that will get to where Claude was talking about in the beginning in terms of actually building up momentum, whether it's the Me Too thing or whatever. We talk to each other too much. I'll stop talking.
So scale up.
Anyone else want to come in at this point? Okay. Panel, back to you guys. Do any of you want to say anything else on this question before I move on? Or are you happy if we move on a little? Okay. You've kind of started answering my second one, so I'm actually going to move on to my third question, which, Tina, links to what you said about needing high quality but simple evidence. And, you know, one of the things that we often see is that case studies and qualitative research are somehow viewed as less rigorous. And, Rod, it links to you, it's small, and it doesn't have an impact, and it's not quite enough evidence for what we want. And, you know, words are sometimes, for some reason, seen as less useful than numbers. How can we present these alternative types of evidence so that their value and their usefulness becomes clearer? Tina, I'm going to come to you first because you raised this as an issue.
Yes, and that's a good point. I think, a colleague and I recently have done some research where we were asking NGOs and industry associations in Europe, probably some of the people in this room, but it was on an anonymous basis, about how they communicated the multiple benefits of energy efficiency to decision makers in Europe and at the national level. And what they said to us was actually you need both case studies and quantitative numbers, that numbers on their own don't persuade people to do things, and stories on their own might not be powerful enough, but their view was that you needed both. And that the case studies had to be salient to the decision maker. So it wasn't just policy makers, it might have been people making investments in energy efficiency. So you needed a sort of a wide range of salient stories, case study stories that spoke to the people you were trying to influence, and then you also had your quantitative. So it wasn't a case of one or the other, they were telling us you needed both, and I thought that was very interesting.
Hey, Kevin, can I come to you? Because you're the numbers man, you like the numbers. So how do we make the words work for you?
Well, I was just going to add on to Tina's point that Yeah, I think that's actually quite important, is this humanising of our energy efficiency policy. And there's one nice programme in the US which was Faces of Energy Efficiency, and that does actually create a better narrative in terms of what efficiency can do. In terms of case studies, yes, of course, I want the numbers to put into my models. That's ultimately what it boils down to. But yeah, so I'd actually like both to happen.
Well, those that know me know that storytelling is front of mind. I don't know if that's the right term. But absolutely, I concur that stories that humanize and that bring home what something is about, including numbers, work really well. But it's also you can do very qualitative research, ethnographic research, and then do a survey behind it, figuring out if the things you found are actually representative for a larger group, and in that sense combine the power of both. But what I also wonder is, we're talking about delivering numbers instead of words or combination, etc. But what very often happens is that if you deliver a story, which is by definition more holistic or systemic, the silo nature of policy making comes up, and they say that it's really interesting, but I can't do this on my own, therefore I can't do it. I need other departments doing it as well. And so I think there is a need for a debate also on the siloed nature of policy making as well.
Gert, would you like to?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that the way numbers are sometimes used is almost makes them useless, because numbers are very often used without contextualizing them. So take the example of when you say fossil fuel subsidies have this or that importance. There are different methodologies out there, and it matters a great deal which methodology you use. And what kind of results you then get by using these methodologies. So a figure just by itself, without contextualizing it, doesn't mean anything, but we treat it as gospel, and that's where the problem starts a little bit. In terms of quantitative versus qualitative, I think in social sciences, at least when you start comparing things, it's always better to use both. Because if you have, say, you have a large-scale sample, a large-scale survey with a large sample where you ask lots of people in a standardized way something, then this will give you a trend. It will give you a direction in which things may be moving, but you may not be able to understand what's behind that trend. And that's what you need the case studies for. That's where you need to go into greater depth and talk to people. And if you use both of these techniques, then you can say the stories or the interviews or whatever, they stand for something bigger. And at the same time, you can say, well, the trend is not just some abstract kind of thing that I cannot explain. So if you do that the right way, then you get the best of both worlds.
Serena, do you want to add anything to that? So
I concur with what has been said. That I think we have to continue working with numbers. We need numbers. We need quantitative assessment. We need to build a case, to assess the impact. We need to be able to track impacts, being them in terms of techno, engineering, kind of, but also economic, regarding GDP and jobs. I think we cannot deny that that's still very important and powerful, and also helping us understanding a lot. But at the same time, I dream of a possibility to use more and to know more from stories, from case studies, and definitely we are continuing supporting also that research goes on in that, and is able to inform us, inform our work in dialogue with the numbers.
Claude, have you successfully used case studies to persuade somebody to do something?
I'm thinking. Maybe I give you an answer later. What pops up to my mind, when it comes to new buildings, we have the near zero energy building standard. We have to follow this up, but de facto, I think it should be relatively easy to get all new buildings in Europe to 0 or even to plus, with one caveat is which we are now getting, for example, in my small country, which is the ventilation systems are not done professionally. You get now people, including myself, I have rented an apartment where when I get up in the morning, the air is so dry that I have problems with my nose. So I think we have one issue of, and that's linked to social science, is if we get a technical solution, which is a net zero energy building with the ventilation, I think you can only get to that with an obligatory ventilation system. Then afterwards, I think it's the whole, what we forget about is how do we educate the workforce who is basically doing it, and then how do we educate the user if such a building system. And I think that's also about do we have anybody in Europe who has looked about how do we make sure that these kind of technical positive gadgets, near zero energy building with a ventilation which is recovering heat, that we get this also well used. So that, I don't know, I put a question. And then when it comes to existing buildings, I think isn't the biggest problem today is that the business model behind is just not existing. The first lie is that in an age of low oil prices and gas prices, you don't recover your money. There is no cost-efficient, deep renovation. There is no such thing like that because you are in a payback of 70 years. So we have to, first thing I think is that we have to tell people we do this for the climate change, we don't do this for recovering money. This is a big lie which we have to stop. And the second thing is, I think that people would be delighted to renovate if it would not be as costly and if it would not be as cumbersome, which then brings us to the logistics of somebody from, I think, a company called Rockwool one day said, you have high tech, you have low tech, and you have the building industry. So, which is the issue about, I think that the way we organize renovations today, this is, it's like Stone Age. And then I think we can think of, I think for me the social science on renovation of buildings should then concentrate on how do we get other business models, how do we improve the logistics, and because as long as the business model is not there, you can make the best information campaigns, renovate, nobody will do it.
Okay, there are quite a few case studies coming through of different business models. So over to the audience for comments on the use of more qualitative data.
Thank you. I wanted to catch up what you said. So I was wondering if what the panel thinks about the market-driven approach in energy efficiency. So this is widely perspired in most of the support programs that you have to bring a self-sufficient model that all the measures are paid by the saving, but I think this is not always possible. So, but it's maybe there is a wrong policy, just to trespassing the problem to like do it yourself. No, I don't pay money because I don't have this money, and so. But this is not like in the healthcare system. So you cannot have a profitable healthcare system. So self-sustained, or nobody thinks that he's going to have better improved car. He just buys a car. It's not paid off by the by the renovation. So why we think that buildings can always, all the retrofitting or all measures can be paid by themselves? We have to recognize that there should be public money or some more effort. Not only the business case can pay by itself here. So.
Okay, hold your thoughts on that for a minute so that other people in the audience who would like to make a comment before we go back. We've got a couple here.
Hi, Rodolphe Nicole from Buildings 2030. definitely what we think at Building 2030 is we need to change the narrative. This is exactly what we want to do. I mean, to see the bigger pictures and to understand exactly what it means, the multiple benefits of energy efficiency. I mean, for the last 6-7 years, I saw multiple benefits of energy efficiency on every presentation, everywhere, from EIB, European Commission, from private, public sector, from everybody. But no one is able to set up a methodology about that. No one is really set up to quantification and monetization of that. And that changed completely the debate. Because we are moving from curing to preventing by explaining to not necessarily the consumers or the users, but to the citizens, that the building they are living, working, studying into it could have an impact on their health, well-being, and productivity. Okay? And I'm so sorry to say that again, because I said it previously, but energy efficiency, I mean, who cares? I'm so sorry to say that that way. Who cares? If we still think that we're going to sell the concept to public opinion leaders, I mean, it's a total disaster, I promise. But if we explain properly that we're going to take part, of course, of the technical dimension and so on and so on, but the impact on you, on your health, well-being, productivity, on your children, on your relatives, on your friends, on your world life will be that one. And this is also the link with the behaviors, okay? But if we don't go to that road, I mean, we're going to continue to have the figures that we unfortunately have on the lovely graphs that we are working on. So that's why my comment. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Adrian Joyce from the European Alliance of Companies for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. Tina, your remarks sparked a thought in my mind about what the social sciences and humanities can do for our question. And that is the realization, and Claude really referred to it without using the word, that what we're trying to achieve is highly complex. And we at least have come to the realization that we can't, any one of us, do it on our own. So we need to create networks of the right actors that come together to find the solutions that will work, that will help to accelerate towards a more energy efficient and decarbonized world. What lessons can the social sciences and humanities teach us about the dynamics of such networks, so that each organization or person involved in the network feels their voice is heard, feels that they've got a role to play, and feels valued in this work? Because I think if we can't find and describe those dynamics, we're not going to solve the problem. So it's a thought that I work with in also the Renovate Europe campaign. How do you keep refreshing a campaign, or how do you keep a network fresh over time? Can the social sciences and humanities help us to understand those dynamics better?
Okay. Niels, do you want to add something? Got anybody else who'd like to add before we go back to the panel? Okay, back to you guys. So we have questions around public funding being needed or not. That it's not, we shouldn't be talking about energy efficiency. Comments on that. And then a question, what can we understand from the social sciences and humanities about the dynamics of networks? Would any of you like to take any particular one of those to start with? Good.
I'm going to stick my neck out real far and try the network question. I'm a political scientist by training, so this is actually not very much inspired by what I do on a day-to-day basis. But I think when we talk about things like political populism, for instance, and we do talk at the European Commission about the challenges that carbon-intensive regions face, there is a subtext to that, and that is that I think we see a greater polarization in society that puts a distance between people who would engage anyways, and those are the ones that you will easily motivate also around energy efficiency targets and green targets. But you also have a fairly large number of people, I don't know if it's growing or if it's not growing, but you have a fairly large number of people who are either very much frustrated by the system, the political process, or who at any rate would not engage with anything that smacks of a moral goal of some kind. And I think that's where the challenge lies. And you need to, if you want to broaden the appeal of an agenda like energy efficiency, yes, there is a moral and a normative component, but I don't think you should start with that if you want to convince people and bring them around. I think you have to find ways of letting people engage in a piecemeal fashion. Just, a little bit here and a little bit there, maybe not even seeing themselves as changing the world or anything, but still partaking in these kind of agendas. I think that's the trick to get people involved in these sorts of things. It could be very pragmatic. It could be, about whatever, their neighborhood getting involved in certain things. So then the neighborhood spirit would kicks in, and you would get them through there. But you have to find another way. You can't just go and say we all need to be greener in our everyday life and therefore we must do X, Y, Z. That's not going to work beyond the usual suspects who will, in any rate, be in favor of that. It's a big challenge, and it has something to do with this disillusionment towards institutions and politics and the system, which you somehow have to get. But if you don't, I guess what I'm trying to say is you can't, perhaps you shouldn't do it head on. You have to find somehow another way of getting to that.
Yes. Your question about public funding and the business models and leaving it to the market. What I think is that one of the problems that we are facing is that indeed this return on investment is reigning in a sense and dominating all the debates. And a few years ago, I don't remember who said it, but someone said, listen, when I'm putting in a new toilet, I don't think about return on investment either. I need it, right? So there is the whole narrative, as you say, is already perhaps wrong in the sense that we think about return on investment at all. But if we do, and we take it forth to what that means for business models, I mean, if we now have the numbers, I can't believe I'm saying that. If we now have the numbers that identify the productivity increase of people in healthier buildings, I mean, that also implies then that they would be more productive if their own home is healthier, right? Less sick days, etc., etc. Why not create a business model where the value obtained for the employer, less sick days, more productivity, is also seen back in, for example, mechanisms where helping your employee renovate his or her home is deductible by tax or anything. I mean, it's a systemic thing, and if all those benefits that go beyond the influence reach of a single actor need networks, which they do, then the business models need to be network collaborative business models as well. We're not there yet, but I think that is part of the answer. And another thing I would like to comment is, I heard saying we need to educate, and I fully agree, the workforce and the users, but we also, I think, need to take a step back and we need to educate the technology developers. Because technology in itself is not neutral, and for example, those ventilation schemes, Claude, that you are experiencing, they have not been designed well. Because they don't work. They don't do what they need to do for you to use them. So there needs to be a loop back also to developers of these type of technologies, also when integrating them into systems, which very often doesn't happen in terms of networks, and focus on the use phase. And that's what Rod also, I think, wanted to say. If you want to get people to actually renovate their home, understand what it takes to actually use a renovation and go through this renovation process, and that there is a gap in competencies, time, effort that needs to be filled by an actor which is not there yet. So.
Okay. Anyone else want to say anything else? Claude, you said that you want to know why things went wrong. That's one of the things you want to learn from mistakes. Certainly the experience I've had in the UK is that politicians...
Brexit went wrong.
Yeah, well, we don't talk about that though. Is that politicians really don't like it when things go wrong. It's very embarrassing for them, and yeah, you know, it's the worst thing that can happen. So what I'd like to ask you is if whether you can come up with examples of fairly recent policy disasters from the politician's perspective that could have been avoided if we'd made better use of the insight from social sciences and humanities. Okay, Ruth, I'm going to go to you first.
No.
Brexit.
Yeah, agreed. Anything else? How about to do with energy efficiency? No?
Ooh,
Yeah.
okay, very, oh well.
You have an example.
Okay,
I have only success stories, so that's
Lucky you.
Arianna Vitali, WWF. Yes, I have an example. Take the 2020 energy efficiency target. We are not meeting them, and we knew since it was decided that one of the reasons was that the target was not binding, because you need proper enforcement. And now we are in 2018, we see a trajectory of energy consumptions that is picking up. Maybe if the target was binding, we would be in a different situation now.
Yeah, Niels Borg from eceee. We had a seminar like this 6-7 years ago on systems and on eco-design, and Alan Meyer from the US showed their work they've been doing on programmable thermostats for the homes. And they found out the EPA had a label, and they took for granted if you have them, people would save a lot of energy. And they actually found out that those homes were using more energy than those that had not programmable thermostats, because then it turned out that people had no idea how to use them, and there was no way to assess if they were easy to use or not. And it turned out that actually they were, I think about you, Ruth, they were designed by manufacturers not for the consumers but for the installers. So the more fancy stuff they had, the more in love the installers were with them, and sold them to the consumers who had no idea, and most of them didn't even have the clock set right. So even if you could program it, it would do the wrong things or the right things but at the wrong time. So having understood how people were, and if you go to our website, look at the seminars, there's a little film where they actually did a test on how people that could program, do 4 simple programming tasks. You only see the hands on this thermostat. It's very painful. And they tried to see how long time it takes for somebody to set the clock on the thermostat. And they fail. And they did it with about 100 subjects to try to find out how you can do an easily programmable thermostat. So yes, you have to start from scratch, as if people, design technology for people who use it.
Anyone else want to?
Well, I suppose we could talk about the Green Deal, which was another great UK policy success. Yes. So there was this policy which we had for a while called the Green Deal, which was the idea that instead of that people who were able to pay, so people with a bit more money, would take a loan, which would be they would pay off through their electricity bill to renovate their homes, and the interest rates on the loans were rather high, and the design of the scheme was rather overcomplicated and rather bureaucratic, and you had to have various forms of intervention done before you could agree to get your loan, and there were all sorts of problems with it. But I think, and there was some social science and other research done before the scheme came in, but the government didn't wait for the results of the trial period before it put the whole scheme in. That was one of the issues. So although it was doing the research, it didn't wait to listen to what it said, and what it said was actually it's a lot harder than you think, and there's a lot more non-economic barriers in the way. Just because people say when they're asked in a survey, why don't you do it? Oh, tick, I haven't got the money. That doesn't mean if you make some expensive money available to them, they'll go, oh, great, I'll take that, and I'll do all this really technically competent stuff where there's no supply chain to do it for me, and I don't really know what I'm doing, and etc., etc. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can explain why that policy didn't work, but there are also a lot of people in advance of the policy saying this won't work for all these reasons, and some of those people were social scientists, and I think it was, it's a complicated story of failure, and it's a story of failure that the UK government, generally speaking, doesn't want to talk about, and occasionally you meet civil servants and they'll say things like, oh, well, it was just this, and you think, And it wasn't just that. I mean, there were lots of complex things that went wrong, and I don't think we've actually admitted to ourselves yet necessarily what they all are and know how to make sure we don't make those mistakes again, because it's been, you know, a disaster really for many aspects of renovation in homes in the UK and for people who could have benefited from that.
Good, but I tried to understand this disaster, and I think it wasn't the real disaster that the Liberal Democrats and Ed Davey had put this in the coalition agreement, and then afterwards the Tories filibustered. So yeah, I think it was more, wasn't it more a political fight not to do. I think if Ed Davey would have complete freedom to do what he wanted to do, the Green Deal would have functioned. But then afterwards, it was also because he didn't get money from the Treasury, and so my assumption was more it was a political failure because of not having an agreement in the government to do the right thing. Because how can you have a Green Deal without money? And that was...
Well, but the theory was that people didn't need any additional money because they would just get the loan and they wouldn't be paying out any more than they did before.
Yeah, good, but that, yeah, I think...
I mean,
I think the deal in the beginning was that there would be a lot of public money in addition to, and then the Tories just didn't deliver what they had promised in the coalition agreement.
But I think
good, but maybe it's a detail.
I mean, there was lots of things that happened, but some of the things were quite conceptual. Like I heard the government minister who was introducing it saying, well, this is the last intervention you'll ever need in your home if you take a Green Deal. And I think that fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between people and their homes and buildings and how they change over time. And that's partly a social scientific understanding of how people live in homes, what they do, how they renovate them. So there's some big picture stuff about how we live that was, I think, misunderstood, and how people answer surveys when they say, oh, it's only the money that stops me. That's a bad survey that people have answered, incorrectly. That's some of the reasons why the policy wasn't quite...
And how do people renovate?
Well, some people like to do everything at once. Some people like to do it over 20 years, and there's a variety of...
It's complicated.
It is complicated.
And indeed, one of the ministers involved said this will be the biggest renovation programme in the UK since the Second World War, and I'm so confident it will work that I will not sleep again until 10,000 Green Deals are signed. And 3.5 years later, there was 9,900 and some, so I'd quite like to do a bit of a study of him to see how he's getting on. But anyway, it was a political interference that partly stopped it, but it also was they hadn't got the right evidence. Agneta.
And I agree that most politicians don't want to speak about the failures, but they don't speak enough about their successes either, and they don't understand why did this program go right. And I think we need to start there to get them into the discussion, and then after a while, when we're confident on the things that gone right, then we can start discussing what went wrong.
Jan Rosenau from the Regulatory Assistance Project. I'm not going to comment on the Green Deal. I've actually written a paper on that question, why did it fail? So if you're interested, I can share that with anyone in the audience. But I spent too many years of my life looking at it, and it's rather frustrating. But no, the example I have is a Polish white certificates program, which was very ambitious. You know, they wanted to deliver the entire Article 7 target under the Energy Efficiency Directive with that program. And only 4% of all the applications submitted got approved. And why is that? Because it was very complex to fill in the paperwork. Had they asked a social scientist to research business processes, they would have found out that businesses don't work in that way. They don't fill in 10 or 15 pages of application material. It has to be easy. So that's a good example of a failing policy.
I recently have been invited to the GRC for a workshop with regional authorities. And I made my usual speech that you already heard. And they asked me, what can be a leverage for your opinion? And I say, well, the Green Public Procurement Directive could be something useful in the future. And a guy from, I don't remember the Swedish regional authorities, raised his hand. He didn't say a word for half a day, but he raised his hand like this and he said, we had such a program 25 years ago in Sweden. It works pretty well. And we got in the same room people discussing that kind of best practices exchanges without any knowledge of what finally they needed or what the others were doing. And we stopped more or less the discussion here, but I think the Green Public Procurement Directive would be a fantastic driver in a certain way to educate those who are supposed to have those dialogues with installers, technology managers, and so on. And this is something we should not give up on.
And if I didn't completely get your point, and public procurement on what? Yeah, but give a concrete example.
Services. I mean, if you're in charge of facility management for public healthcare facilities, for instance, you have to make a choice at a certain moment. Okay, you have a public market, and you're going to send that out, and you're going to receive some response. But sometimes you're not necessarily enough trained about what is existing outside on the market. Sometimes because you don't receive any training for the last 10 years, you're not informed, you're not equipped to take the right decision. Okay, and this is something probably we should pay attention to, because if we have those people trained, I mean those buyers at the right level, able to have the right discussion, to ask actually to the build sector more about what they want in terms of performance, to say, okay, I want an healthy buildings, I want that kind of performance, that kind of level of performance. I don't care about how we're going to do that, but I want also to have a guarantee on that. That's going to turn completely the discussion. And this is not the case at all for the moment.
And by the way, we have that database still in Sweden, and the municipalities are using it, and it's very successful.
Okay, just to step up the level of difficulty a little bit further, there's a lot of issues in getting the social sciences and humanities properly reflected in the energy efficiency policy that we're making at the moment. If we go beyond efficiency to sufficiency, I can already feel the politicians running for the hills. We really do need to understand collaboration. We need better to understand people, not only people as everyday lives, energy consumers, changing their lifestyles, but also politicians as people, and how we help them get their heads around sufficiency, how we help them see that it's a place we need to go to. How are social sciences and humanities going to help us convince that sufficiency is where we need to be? Who'd like to go first on that?
I think it's very easy. It's all about meditation. I'm serious. How will people be willing to be sufficient if they are not happy? So, and then happiness and this some studies I have seen, it's about you need a basic income, which is not a low basic income, but a sufficient income. And afterwards it's about, are you happy with yourself? Are you in love? Are you, how are you dealing with your neighbor, your friends? And we ask, how much money and do we spend about this? And I'm really serious. We have a serious problem that we are trying to speak about sufficiency in a world where spirituality or happiness is a no-go. And it's even a bigger no-go on the left-wing progressive policy makers, because there it's a complete no-go. So we are stuck. And I tell you this, so I don't show this to the Luxembourgish government officials. Huh? Because otherwise they may kick me out when they make the government next week.
Tina, have you got some thoughts?
So you agree? Or you disagree? Be frank.
I don't know. I haven't thought about. Well, I think if we're trying to have this bigger discussion, then clearly we need people like philosophers and so on to help us think about, well, what's it all about? What do we need? What do we want? What meaning are we making out of our lives? How are we going to, achieve these lofty goals that our governments keep signing up for, but in our day-to-day lives we don't often see them reflected. And in a sort of more modest way, it's about trying to link in with different sorts of values that people have, because we know not everybody's got an environmental orientation, but it doesn't mean that most people don't care about their future, their children's future, etc., etc. It doesn't mean that most people don't want to avoid waste, And we've been doing work with some other colleagues using the Schwartz value system, which is a sort of psychological tool of understanding the values that people bring into their decision making, and looking at, you know, small and medium enterprises as well as individuals and so on, and finding that you don't have, you know, there's a range of different values, of course, that we all have within us, and that different approaches can speak to different things. And there are some quite good universal values around not wasting, around conserving, around care for your local community and care for your family and friends. So I think we can find other bases on which to work with people, whether or not they have green ambitions. We can, you know, help them to move in a better direction, I think.
Yes, well, I don't know about meditation, but I do know that what you just said is, I think, key, and that is that instead of focusing on energy and efficiency, etc., it's about what do you need to be the human you want to be in a collective, in the world, etc. And I think that if you turn the question around and you start from that perspective, so the human perspective again, then you can't do anything else but in the end think about what is enough, what is sufficient for me to be what I want to be, where I want to be, etc. So yes, perhaps not for me, but
yeah, I don't know much about energy.
Has EU Commission a position on meditation?
Yeah, no, my no, maybe not. I'm not going that far. No, about energy sufficiency, I think I still have to understand a little bit what the concept. I haven't yet enough dived into the new website and the reports and the project, but it really seems to me that you are going into a very different framework where you are bringing in issues like values and that are not in the typical discussion when we talk about energy efficiency, which is about using resources better, but not touching how much we need, how much do we want, or really our values. So it looks like a completely different framework. And I'm just wondering, are we the right, I mean, our researcher, is really a contribution from research that we need, or maybe on that, or maybe it's really something that it's much broader or comes into questions, not research, but our beliefs and values, which goes a little bit beyond the discussion that we could have at this level.
No, and the good thing is that there is research about the results of meditation. And you can apparently you can show that well, I say meditation can be Tai Chi and something which brings you a bit out of this kind of short-termism or whatever, and that this you have research about this. You have also research on sociology that apparently when you have 8, 10, 12% of people who really want something, that you get to it, because the society has a lot of people who are just following. So, but then I think so. What I don't know if are we coming to an end?
Well, I don't know if I'm right, but I think I heard that in India the minister is actually putting yoga on the agenda throughout society, because he wants people to connect again with each other, with nature, etc., because that might be the first step towards a more aware society. Yeah. So it's
be also aware that it's a diplomatic weapon of India to get and it's come on, India, China. And they are Moody is a clever guy. He has discovered that that there is nothing more Indian than yoga, and yoga is everywhere. So they are using this as an instrument of foreign policy, which is interesting, that they have finally discovered that something and be aware there's more yoga practitioners in US and in UK and in Europe than in India, relatively speaking. So it has almost died out in India versus in certain Western countries. But they are now using it as also, so it's also about a brand for their country.
Yes, and there is even a debate again used by social scientists to identify the first Sanskrit scriptures mentioning yoga, indeed. So that's perhaps not what we want.
I think we are trying to get very confusing when we say.
Well, I was going to congratulate Claude for being a courageous politician, because I agree with you fully, and I'm deadly serious as well. Though I'm not sure I would choose the word happiness. I might choose the word contentment. Are we content with our lot in life? And I think maybe that's something we could examine more closely, because for me, contentment is understood differently by different groups. The mechanisms that lead us to being content are societal. They're to do with expectations, they're to do with upbringing, they're to do with class. And if we understood contentment better, and we could find contentment in our lives, we might be more willing then to do things that are difficult. But in order to have everyone in a contentment space, you have to broker between the different expectations. And that's where the social sciences and humanities come in, to assist us in this brokering process between different levels of expectation, because high expectations that are not achieved lead to frustration, lack of contentment, lack of happiness, jealousy, other human emotions, because we are very much emotional beings, and we don't talk about emotional aspects of our being in policy discussions. Now, I probably burnt a few bridges by saying that, but that's my personal conviction. And if we could find contentment in our lives, then we'd all be in a much better place, and we'd be much more capable of doing difficult things together.
Absolutely. Yeah, did you want to follow that?
No, he wants to get back to the Green
You want to
Deal.
correlate contentment with energy demand?
I might have to do some meditation first. No, I actually wanted to bring it back to sort of a boring policy question, really. And I mean, it's a bit of it's something that we've been discussing within RAP and with partners over the last couple of years. I'm interested in the panel's views on, extending standards we've used successfully for appliances in the past for existing buildings. And we don't have them yet. Existing buildings don't have to be renovated. Only where there's a major renovation, you have to replace the building elements with more efficient elements, but there are no standards in place. And it's politically a very hard sell, but it potentially could save a lot of energy. So I'm interested in both your views of whether you think it's a good instrument, and if so, what are we doing with the political challenge of actually getting that done and finding the brave politicians to push for it?
Okay, just hold your thoughts on that for a minute, because can we just go to Edward and Jens, so can we go to Edward at the back before we come back to the panel?
Thank you, Edouard Toulouse, consultant. It's interesting in this discussion because when we start talking about saving energy beyond efficiency, so the sufficiency concept, it often comes down to individual values or discussion of personal preferences. And I think it's a bias because to me sufficiency has a lot to do with social norms, that is more collective constructs. If we could change some of the social norms, then we could save a lot of energy and really progress in terms of sufficiency. And I think this is really a field for social sciences to help us in this. We tend to put a lot of focus on individual preferences, forgetting that they are very much shaped by these social norms. The reason why we, want clean clothes every day and we use so much our washing machines is not only about personal preference, it's also because of a social norm. So I'd be very happy to see more work being done on this. There's been some in the past by famous social scientists like Chauve and so on, but not so much on the current situation and how we can change these social norms. Thank you.
Can I have some last question? I would like to ask, what do you think about mandatory energy disclosure regulations in Europe? This has been adopted in US with some success, but it's not been very popular or adopted in Europe, and this opens a lot of issues to social norm, and especially in public sector, opening the energy consumption data publicly can bring a lot of place for social sciences.
Okay, so we've got a couple of very specific questions around specific policy types, regulation of existing buildings and energy disclosure, and also a comment around social norms. I'm going to give each of you a chance to respond to the questions, make any comments around social norms, and then I'm going to come back to you for a closing comment. So first of all, in response to what the floor had just said, Ruth, would you like to start on this? No. Okay. Kevin, would you like to start on this?
Yes, very quickly then, on mandatory disclosure of energy consumption in buildings. Yeah, I guess that's a perfectly sensible idea. Having information is clearly one of the first steps to doing things. In terms of building codes, I think that's an adjunct to that, or building codes or retrofitting existing buildings. That's quite a challenge, using a similar policy toolkit as we've used for appliances very successfully. For buildings, I think clearly it does become a lot harder because the retrofit costs can be very substantial. Of some, as we've said, they do not necessarily repay. Although we are starting to get some policy interventions at that point, so certainly France, England and Wales have started to look at renting out buildings where you have to have a minimum energy standings, minimum energy performance standard for the building. So yes, we are starting to move in that direction, but I think it's still problematic to use that full toolbox to go the whole way. We'll talk over drinks later.
Tina, do you want to add anything to that? Sorry, no. Good.
Try and let me try something.
Well, when will Commission come forward with a mandatory?
No, I think yeah.
So from every building from which is not DE has to be retrofitted to an A+.
I can imagine strong resistance between with colleges later in passing proposals of this kind.
Watson's team would be motivated and daring enough to do it.
Well, he will be there in a minute, so you can ask. No, I think we definitely can. We can see that standards have been really effective in products, and it's a kind of policy that is spread globally, and but we can also see the limit of the approach even when we try to apply to systems, not just one product, but products that works together in industry. For instance, when we try to go beyond just a single technology, but combine them together, because you had much more complexity. So I'm really when I did research, I'm also a political scientist by education, and I've compared the impact of command and control policies or standards and the like with market-based. And of course, you have much more evidence of the standards and regulation working than the market-based. But that's also because of the greater diffusion of them. So I think we don't have to. We have to be to understand also the limit of standard, and perhaps they are not the correct instrument when we look at a very complex issue like a building. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to discuss and see if there are best practices and things that can be inspiring and have been applied. I think in just a comment on the social norms and that we do something not just because it's an individual choice, but it's just but it also because there are some collective dimension. I think that's very interesting, and I also see great potential of contribution from social sciences in there when we start to address and study issues like what is the ideal minimal space that we need for an office to work, for instance. These kind of questions that have a great interest from an energy efficiency perspective, and they combine to some extent some intelligence from engineering and technical sciences, but at the same time also a lot of issues that concerns our performance at work, but also well-being and so on. So I think there are indeed some of these questions that will be very interesting to have studies and examples also building on research on social sciences. So I see interesting questions there.
I like standards. I think standards is a very big part of the climate solution. And we need to create, in a certain sense, a societal or at least a political consensus that we need standard setting. When it comes to buildings, I think what the Dutch has done on commercial buildings is a good approach. I think we should research this more, or we should try to spread this all over Europe. I think for commercial buildings, I don't see any outside some vested interests reasons why when you rent out a business flat, and if it is D or E, and if you want to rent it next, that you have to upgrade it. I don't see any reason why we cannot impose a standard. I think the world looks probably very different when it comes to residential buildings. The French, you know that Hulot had it in the law, and then basically there was it was killed also by this idea that this is almost like communism, or I don't know what. So I think it's, and that's why if I can, what is a bit my best guess where we need social science is first, it's about a big positive narrative. So this Saturday, for example, for all those who are in Brussels, it's about J climat. Have you seen the video? Yeah. So J climat. So this weekend, NGOs and others try to organize the biggest ever rally, joyful rally in the streets of Brussels with some Brussels beer and some fun, Belgian beer, not Brussels beer, on climate. So and I think it would be an interesting exercise for social science. And there's a video which is now turning around of somebody calling someone. So I call her. Can I invite you to a pizza or to my house on Saturday? And then what is your answer?
Je peux pas, j'ai climat.
No, j'ai climat, which means I go to the rally. So I think we need this kind of big events. And what is interesting is, look, I think I feel that this wave is building up. And we need also social science about, so why was this one YouTube video which was basically done for the French market with only French actors, why was it so successfully, and now it's used in Belgium, and so why, so to better understand the bigger picture, the narrative. The second thing is, look, I don't pretend to be arrogant, but I think I roughly know what we have to do. So we need a CO2 and cars, very tough legislation. We need to follow on our efficiency legislations. We need and so on and so on. So and then I need things like, for example, how do we get people to stop to do something which is economic nonsense, which is owning a car when you live in a big city. It's an economic complete nonsense. But why are people? So what is the the social norm? How do we build the social norms that people understand? I have an app where I can rent a car for 3 hours. Very easy. So why good? And then the next step is, for example, where I need social science. Why are people not massively? So I have driven BMW electric car, some Zoe, Renault. It's fantastic. I beat every Lamborghini at the red lights. So it's so joyful to drive electric, and so why? So in purchasing electric cars, where is the barrier? That is where and I think we need social science in it's about detailed questions of a policy measure where where enough people know that's what I need to do. Good, okay. and then to wrap it up, and then it's about sufficiency. And Edouard, you are right, and it's a mix. Sometimes we go too much into the individual. For example, social norm. Why do buildings need to be refrigerators during summer? So these social norms that you are a good building owner if you enter a building and people are almost frozen when they get in. So where is air? Why do we have a norm that buildings need to be air conditioned not at 24, 25, but at 18? And how can we quickly build a social norm or maybe even a regulation so that we change this? That would be an enormous saving, and it will be an enormous saving for the health system too. So I think it's this mix of bigger picture. How do we get the things we know we need to do done, and then the third thing is about this kind of sufficiency, norm building, and that's all issues where we need you.
Okay, thank you. Be aware, rest of the panel, I would like to hear a final comment from each of you. You are soon going to be standing between people and their drinks. So if we could just go along the panel, any final thoughts you would like to add?
So I'm done, I understand.
Very quickly, I think we definitely, I would like to encourage researchers and academics to continue their work and to challenge us with questions and results that are not always very optimistic or easy to take on board, but I think we definitely need this complexity, so yeah, it's welcome. And again, if I can flag again an area where I think we need more to understand more and to do better is really communicating the benefits of efficiency and engaging with people. I'm not sure if the Commission is the right interlocutor for that, because maybe this is something that needs to be done at a different level, so also inputs and ideas regarding these questions are very welcome.
I mean, you could ask, I suppose, why are we moving into talking about sufficiency? Because as we've heard from all the detailed questions about efficiency, there's lots of things on efficiency that we're not getting right yet. You know, there's lots of interesting work on multiple benefits, there's lots of work on communication, there's lots of things we could do on efficiency, and I think we still need to keep doing all of those things. But I think for, you know, particularly for reasons of climate change, but not only that, but, you know, we clearly need to move beyond the barriers about that, and we need to be a bit braver about talking about values, but also recognising that we're always talking about values. So I think you mentioned something, you said, oh, well, of course we're doing efficiency for reasons to make better use of resources, it's not a values-based thing. Well, you know, that is a value, actually. And just like, for example, there's a movement in academia now to try and reduce flying abroad for conferences. And clearly, the current practice of flying embodies all sorts of values, you know, status, efficiency, international exchange. There's all sorts of values in there. It's not just that the thing we're changing to has values and this stuff before is just the right thing to do and we don't need to interrogate it. So I think, yes, we should keep doing our really detailed research around efficiency and all the things that we do, but we should be expanding our boundaries and interrogating a bit more what we're up to and how we're going to make the major changes we know we need to make.
Thank you. Kevin? So as the very technical person, and Yeah, I would say
What
MEPS.
numbers do you want?
No, I just want numbers. But basically, yeah, it should just be MEPS standards. That is the way forward. It makes the whole world, a better place. However, I do accept that there's a limited appetite. So there's some places where that's clearly not going to work, and there's a political will not to do that all the way. So I think where that we need a better understanding of failure, where there's that political will not to do that, and then there's spaces where clearly those regulations aren't the space to work, whether it's residential retrofits of houses, and to get a better understanding of that. So if people are willing to spend 30,000 on a granite work surface but aren't willing to insulate their homes, it's just why what's going on. Thank you.
Why?
Just why?
Why?
Why? Well, I think that's actually a bridge to what I wanted to say, so thank you. What I think is that we have this, and this discussion on standards is, I think, an example of that. We think, okay, we put a technology in place, or a standard, or a policy, and that's it. And this learning loop on a systemic level between all of us needs to happen in a much more structured way, because that is also part of creating a new social norm or a set of new social norms. So this learning and organizing learning about what we're doing with a clear focus on not only up to the door, but also the use, the experience of whatever gets behind the door or in the house or whatever, is where social science and humanities, I think, need to stand as an intermediary between all of those worlds. And what I haven't heard a lot, and I agree with you, Eduardo, the social norm is one of the things that we need perhaps to discuss more. And clearly Tina has very good learnings about how to do that as well. But what I also think is, a few years ago at eceee, there was, for me, a revolutionary presentation on experience, bodily embedding experience and energy efficiency in the body by Grégoire Wallenborn and others. And what they demonstrated, and you see that in practice as well, it's a form of a social norm approach. Actually, instead of communicating, engaging, convincing, educating, have people experience it. Let them go and work in a building, or let them go and experience how it is to cook without gas or electric, which is a big issue in the Netherlands now. Make places of experience where people can simply embody what it is to do things differently. I think that is one of the things that we could do more. So, and that requires learning.
Thank you very much to the panel. Lots of food for thought there, I think, so thank you all very much. Just before you get to go for your drinks, I'd just like to hand over to Anita for a few final words.
So thank you very much for guiding us through this afternoon, and thank you to the panel. It's been really great to hear all these insights, and also to you coming to this seminar, this Shape Energy seminar organized by eceee. I think it's like a mega jigsaw puzzle where we find some pieces here and there, and we need to find how to put them together. And I think we are on our way there. So it's really encouraging with all the work we've heard about and all the things we're doing. But we have a lot of work still to do. Thank you very much for coming.